The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing field as Dr. HFY stepped out of the medical facility. Her boots touched the red dust of Cathara Prime for only the third time since the colony had been established. The air was thick and hot, carrying smells that no Earthborn person could ever get used to. Strange plants moved in the wind, and the sky above held a greenish tint that made everything look like it belonged to a dream. HFY had come to Cathara Prime for one reason: to study the creatures that lived here. The colony had been built on the edge of a vast forest, far from the hunting grounds of the planet's most dangerous animals. The scientists had created rules. Everyone knew the rules. Stay inside the walls. Stay away from the forest. Never go alone. And most important of all, if you see a predator, you run. You report it. You let the security team handle it. But today, someone had broken those rules. The message had come through at dawn. A scout team was returning with something unexpected. When HFY arrived at the containment facility, Commander Teo was already there, standing with his arms crossed. His face showed worry and anger at the same time. "We found it near the south perimeter," Teo said, his voice tight and controlled. The team was doing a routine check when they spotted it. It's a juvenile, probably less than 2 years old. They contained it without much trouble. HFY moved closer to the containment chamber. Through the thick, transparent barrier, she could see the creature. It was not what she expected. She had studied the data files about Catharan predators. She knew their size, their weight, their hunting patterns. The records told her these were pure killing machines, monsters of flesh and claw and venom. But what she saw was something different. The creature was small, barely 2 meters long. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to shine like black glass in the light. Long claws curved from its feet, and its teeth were visible even with its mouth partially closed. But its eyes were what caught HFY's attention. They were large and golden, and they moved with fear and confusion. The creature was hurt. "It has wounds," HFY said, moving even closer to the barrier. She could see 3 deep gashes across the creature's left shoulder. The scales around the wounds were torn and damaged. Blood had dried on its skin. "That's why they brought it here, instead of killing it," Teo said. The team thought maybe the wounds could tell us something about its behavior. Maybe it was in a fight with other creatures. Maybe it was abandoned by its pack. HFY's heart ached as she watched the beast. It was pacing back and forth in the small chamber, its movements sharp and nervous. Every few seconds, it would look at the barrier, and when it saw HFY watching it, the creature would hiss. Its body would tense. Its claws would scrape against the metal floor. It was scared. "When will you be sending it away?" HFY asked, still keeping her eyes on the creature. "Standard protocol says we should eliminate it immediately," Teo replied. "But some of the scientists wanted you to look at the wounds first. Maybe you can understand something about Catharan biology from the injuries." HFY nodded. She understood what he was really saying. The creature would be killed. It was just a matter of when. Maybe they were giving her a few hours to study it first. Maybe they thought her medical knowledge could help them understand these dangerous animals better before they destroyed this one. But HFY was already thinking of other possibilities. She spent the next hour examining the creature from a safe distance. She took images. She made notes about the nature of the wounds. She watched how the beast moved and breathed. She listened to the sounds it made: the hisses, the sharp breathing, the occasional growl that seemed to come from deep inside its body. The creature was definitely in pain. It favored its right side. It moved slowly, and when it lay down, which it did several times during the hour, it would lick at its wounds, trying to clean them like any injured animal would. By the time HFY finished her initial examination, she had reached a conclusion that surprised even herself. This creature was not just an animal. It was not just a collection of hunting instincts and deadly abilities. It was something more. It was an individual. It had personality. It had feelings. And most importantly, it was suffering. She found Min-sok in the main laboratory. He was the colony's chief biologist, and he had been the one to originally suggest that HFY examine the creature. Min-sok was older than her, with gray beginning to show in his dark hair. He had spent 20 years studying life on other worlds, and he had learned to see things that others missed. The creature is in pain, HFY said without preamble. The wounds are from something deliberate, not from combat, from something else. Min-seok looked up from his work. What do you mean? Deliberate. The pattern of the wounds. The way they are placed on the body. I think the young predator was abandoned by its mother. I think something happened that made the mother unable to care for it. And when the cub became injured, the mother abandoned it. Min-seok stood up. His eyes were thoughtful. That is a big theory, based on limited information. I know, HFY said. But what if I am right? What if these creatures form bonds the way our animals do? What if they care for their young? What if this cub is not just a mindless predator, but a child who has been abandoned? Min-seok walked to the window and looked out at the containment facility in the distance. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he turned back to HFY. If you are right, he said carefully, then we need to do more than just study it. We need to understand it. And understanding might mean trying something that no one has tried before. HFY felt hope bloom in her chest. What do you mean? I mean, Min-seok said, that perhaps it is time we tried to prove that there is more to these creatures than violence. I mean it is time we treated this one not as a monster, but as what it really is, a child. A frightened, injured child. HFY and Min-seok began to plan. They would not tell Commander Tae. Oh, yet. They would wait. They would work with the creature over several days. They would try to help it heal. They would try to understand it. And if they could prove that these predators were capable of something more than killing, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's understanding of Ketharan life would change forever. 3 days passed slowly. Each day felt like a week to HFY. She spent most of her time in the medical laboratory, watching the creature through the camera feeds. She took notes. She made charts. She observed every movement the beast made, from the moment it woke until it finally fell asleep at night. The wounds were beginning to heal. HFY had programmed the containment chamber to release healing medicine into the water supply. The medicine was designed for general mammalian injuries, and she was not entirely sure it would work on a Ketharan creature. But so far, it seemed to be helping. The bleeding had stopped. The wounds were becoming less angry and red. The creature was moving with less pain and more confidence. But the creature was still angry, still afraid. Every time HFY entered the observation room, the beast would hiss, it would bare its teeth. Its golden eyes would follow her with obvious hatred and fear mixed together. The creature had learned that if it moved to the barrier when HFY was near, the woman would move closer, and so it would strike at the transparent wall, its fangs clicking against the hard material, trying to reach her. HFY never flinched. She would stand there, watching calmly, and eventually, the creature would tire and move away. Min-seok came to watch her work on the 4th day. He carried a data pad and a serious expression on his face. Commander Teo is asking questions, Min-seok said without greeting. He wants to know how much longer we are going to study this creature, before we do what needs to be done. What did you tell him? HFY asked. I told him we needed 5 more days. I told him the data was important. I told him we might learn something that would help us defend the colony from future attacks. Min-seok paused. None of it was a lie, but all of it was incomplete truth. And he accepted that? HFY felt surprised. He did, Min-seok said. But he will not wait much longer. After 5 days, the creature will be eliminated. That is what he told me. So, if you have a plan, HFY, you need to make something happen soon. That night, Hei-Won went to the containment chamber alone. She had disabled the emergency alert system. She had made sure no one was watching on the camera feeds. She had prepared everything she needed. In her pocket was a small device, and in her mind was a theory that could either save the creature or get her killed. She stood at the barrier, watching the creature sleep. The beast was curled up on one side, its massive body rising and falling with each breath. Even in sleep, it looked dangerous. Its claws, even relaxed, were still terrible weapons. Its teeth, even hidden, were still deadly. Hei-Won took a deep breath. She opened a small door in the barrier. This door was designed for passing medicine and food into the chamber safely. It was barely larger than her hand. She reached through and, very slowly, extended her arm further into the chamber. Her hand entered the space where the creature lived. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the creature's eyes opened. The beast was instantly alert. It raised its head. It saw Hei-Won's hand hanging in the air, defenseless and vulnerable, and something in those golden eyes changed. For just a moment, Hei-Won saw confusion. The creature did not understand why this human was offering its hand this way. The beast did not immediately know what to do with the opportunity. Hei-Won remained perfectly still. She controlled her breathing. She kept her hand open and relaxed. She made herself as small and non-threatening as she could. The creature stood. It moved toward her hand slowly. Each step was careful and deliberate. The beast's muscles were tense, ready to strike, ready to defend itself. It was a predator, and predators do not pass up opportunities. The jaws opened. The fangs came forward, and the creature bit. Pain exploded through Hei-Won's hand. For a terrible second, she thought her entire theory had been wrong. She thought the creature was exactly what the colony believed it to be. A mindless killer, a machine designed only to hurt and destroy. The venom would activate. She would feel herself beginning to break apart from the inside. This was the mistake that would end her life. But then the creature released her hand. The bite had gone through her protective glove, and Hei-Won had received enough venom to create a burning sensation and slight numbness in her fingers. But she had prepared for this. She had already taken the anti-venom. She had already protected herself as much as possible. The pain was real, but it was manageable. More importantly, the creature had released her. Hei-Won slowly withdrew her hand through the small door and carefully closed it. Her hand was shaking. Her heart was racing, but she was smiling. She looked at the creature, and the creature looked back at her. Something had changed between them in that moment. The creature did not move back to the corner of the chamber where it usually retreated. Instead, it stayed near the barrier. It sat on its haunches, like a terrestrial dog might sit, and it watched Hei-Won with what looked like curiosity rather than hatred. "You understand," Hei-Won said softly. Her voice was shaking. "You understand that I am not trying to hurt you. You understand that I am trying to help." The creature made a sound. It was not a hiss. It was not an aggressive growl. It was something different. Something that sounded almost like a purr, mixed with a rumble. Something that might have been the sound of a creature that was beginning to relax, beginning to trust, beginning to hope. Min-Sok found Hei-Won in the hallway outside the containment chamber. She was treating her hand with medical supplies, working to clean the venom residue away. "What did you do?" Min-Sok asked. He had seen something on the camera feeds. His face showed shock and concern. "I gave it a choice," Hei-Won replied. "I showed it that I was willing to trust it, and it chose not to kill me." Min-Sok looked at her bleeding hand, then at the creature visible through the chamber window. The beast was still sitting peacefully, still making that strange rumbling purr sound. "If this works," Min-Sok said carefully, "if this actually works, then everything we know about these creatures might be wrong." "I know," Hei-Won said. "That is exactly why we have to keep going." Over the next 2 days, Hei-Won repeated the process. Each time she approached the barrier, The creature would move closer. Each time she extended her hand, the beast would sniff it or touch it gently with its nose. The creature was learning. It was beginning to understand that this human was different, that this human was offering something other creatures of its kind had never offered before: trust. On the evening of the 5th day, as Minseok had warned, Commander Teo arrived at the containment facility. He took one look at the creature, now calm and alert, and at HFY, who was sitting peacefully within arm's reach of the barrier, and his eyes widened with disbelief. "What have you done?" he asked. Commander Teo did not arrest HFY immediately. That was perhaps the most surprising thing about the situation. He simply stood there, watching her through the barrier with an expression that mixed disbelief with something that might have been respect. "I want to hear everything," he said finally. "From the beginning. And I want the truth." They moved to the observation room, where the screens showed every angle of the containment chamber. HFY explained her theory about the creature's abandonment. She showed him the pattern of the wounds. She explained how she had recognized pain and fear in the beast, rather than just aggression. She described the exact moment when the creature had bitten her, and how it had chosen to release her instead of finishing what instinct seemed to demand. Teo listened without interrupting. When HFY finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that HFY did not expect. "My grandfather," he said, "used to tell me stories about animals back on Earth. Dogs, he called them. He said these creatures were born to hunt and kill, but that they had learned to bond with humans. He said they could choose friendship over their nature. I always thought it was just a story, something from the old days that did not matter anymore." He paused. "But if you are right, if this creature is capable of making that same choice, then we have been very wrong about Cathara Prime. So you are not going to kill it?" HFY asked carefully. "Not today," Teo said, "but I cannot give you unlimited time. The colony is nervous about having a predator here. If you want to prove your theory, you need to do more than just show me it can be peaceful. You need to show me it can be controlled. You need to prove it will not be a threat." HFY spent the next week deepening her relationship with the creature. She would enter the observation area adjacent to the containment chamber every day, and she would sit quietly, just being present. The creature would come to the barrier and look at her. Sometimes it would make that rumbling purr sound. Sometimes it would lie down and sleep, seeming comfortable with her proximity. She began to bring it different foods to understand its preferences. She learned that it liked the nutrient supplements more than the raw meat the colony had originally provided. She noticed that it responded well to certain frequencies of sound, becoming calmer when she played soft music through the chamber speakers. But more importantly, she began to recognize patterns in the creature's behavior. It was not random. It was not just instinct. The creature had a personality. It had preferences. It had ways of communicating its needs and emotions. When it was happy, it made a certain sound. When it was tired, it moved in a certain way. When it was curious, its ears would turn forward and its eyes would grow brighter. On the 8th day, HFY decided to try something new. She had prepared a small area in the observation room where the barrier had been modified. The change was carefully controlled. If the creature proved dangerous, multiple safety systems would activate instantly. But HFY believed it was time to test whether the creature could be trusted with more freedom. She opened the modified section of the barrier. The creature's reaction was immediate. Its head came up. Its nostrils flared. It could smell the opening. It could sense the change in the boundary that had contained it for over a week. For several minutes, the beast simply sat there, apparently struggling with something, perhaps with the urge to escape, perhaps with fear of the unknown beyond the chamber. Then, slowly, the creature moved toward the open barrier. It approached cautiously, one step at a time. When it reached the opening, it stuck its nose through and sniffed the air of the observation room. Its golden eyes looked directly at HFY, who was sitting against the opposite wall, deliberately making herself look small and unthreatening. The creature stepped through. For the first time since arriving at the colony, The beast was free from the chamber. Its massive body was now in the same room with HFY, with no barrier between them. Any human who saw this would have screamed. Any security officer would have opened fire immediately. But HFY remained exactly where she was, breathing steadily, watching calmly. The creature took 2 more steps forward. It was now only a few meters away from HFY. She could see the detail of its scales, the complexity of the muscles beneath the skin, the intelligence that burned in those golden eyes. She could also see its claws, fully extended now that it was free. She could see its teeth, visible as it kept its mouth slightly open. She could feel the power that this animal possessed. Then the creature did something unexpected. It lay down. Not in an attack position, not in a hunting crouch. It simply lay down on the ground, its massive body stretching out, and it looked at HFY with what could only be described as trust. The creature had chosen vulnerability in the presence of the only being on this world that had shown it kindness. HFY very slowly moved her hand forward, keeping her movements smooth and visible. The creature's eyes tracked her hand as it came closer. When her fingers finally made contact with the scales on the creature's head, the beast made that rumbling purr sound. It was louder now, and HFY could feel it vibrating through the creature's massive body. She was touching a Ketharan predator, and it was purring. Minseok was the first to see the footage. He watched the video of HFY sitting beside the creature, running her fingers along its head and neck, while the beast made that strange and wonderful sound. When the video ended, there were tears in Minseok's eyes. "They are going to think you have done something to it," he said. "Some kind of modification or chemical treatment. They will not want to believe that it chose this." "Then we show them," HFY said. "We invite them to observe. We let them see with their own eyes that this is real." But before they could do that, an alarm sounded through the colony. Security officers moved through the corridors with weapons drawn. HFY and Minseok looked at each other in alarm. "What is happening?" HFY asked, running toward the main control center. What they found there made her heart sink. On the screens showing the perimeter cameras, they could see movement. Multiple shapes moving through the forest near the southern wall. Not just one creature, not just 2. Dozens of them. The colony was being approached by a pack of adult Ketharan predators, and they were coming toward the containment facility. Commander Teo was shouting orders into his communication device. Security teams were moving into defensive positions around the colony. Weapons that had never been used in actual combat were being prepared and loaded. The colony had known theoretically that the Ketharan predators posed a threat, but it had been 10 months since the colony had been established, and there had never been an actual attack. Everyone had begun to believe that the humans and the creatures could coexist without direct conflict. But now that belief was being tested. "Get everyone into the shelters," Teo commanded. "Lock down all non-essential areas. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." HFY watched the screens in horror as the pack drew closer to the colony's perimeter. The creatures were massive, far larger than the juvenile that had been contained for the past week. They moved with purpose and unity, clearly organized and coordinated in their approach. These were not lost animals wandering aimlessly. This was a hunting pack with a specific target. "They know the juvenile is here," Minseok said quietly, standing beside her. "That cub is part of their pack. They are coming to rescue it." The realization hit HFY like a physical blow. She had thought the cub was abandoned. But what if she had been wrong? What if the mother had not abandoned the injured young one? What if the pack had been searching for it the entire time? What if the wounds had come from something else entirely, and the cub had simply become separated from its family? "We have to tell them," HFY said, moving toward Teo. "Tell them what?" Teo did not look away from the tactical display showing the pack's position. "That you have been secretly bonding with a predator that belongs to this attacking pack? That you think we should release it to them?" "The cub is not a threat," HFY said. "It is a member of that pack. They are not attacking us. They are looking for their young. That is not what this looks like to me, Teo replied coldly. This looks like a coordinated assault. This looks like a predator pack trying to breach our defenses. Haewon made a decision that she knew would have serious consequences. She turned away from Teo and ran toward the containment facility. Min-seok followed her, his face showing concern and understanding. "What are you doing?" Min-seok asked as they ran. "Something that will get us both arrested," Haewon said. "But it is the right thing to do." They reached the observation room. The creature was pacing nervously in the chamber, clearly agitated. It could sense something was wrong. The rumbling purr that had become normal had changed to something more anxious and sharp. The creature knew that danger was coming. Haewon went directly to the containment system's control panel. She had studied it carefully over the past week. She knew how it worked. She knew how to open it. And more importantly, she knew that once she did, there would be no going back to a normal life at the colony. She entered the override code. The barrier that had contained the creature began to open. Not just the modified section that Haewon had used for the creature to enter the observation room. The entire front of the containment chamber unsealed, revealing a direct path to the outside of the facility. The creature's eyes widened. It understood what was happening. For a moment, the beast did not move. It looked at Haewon, and in that look was something that seemed like gratitude or understanding or forgiveness for all the time it had spent in captivity. Then the creature ran. It moved with incredible speed, covering the distance to the exit in seconds. The beast bounded through the facility corridors and burst out into the night air. Haewon watched through the external cameras as the juvenile raced toward the forest, toward the pack that had been searching for it. "Security is on the way," Min-seok said, watching the facility's alarm systems light up with red indicators. "Teo has figured out what we did." Within minutes, security officers arrived. They had weapons drawn, but they did not fire. They simply surrounded Haewon and Min-seok, waiting for orders from their commander. Teo appeared moments later. His face was dark with anger. But before he could speak, something unexpected happened on the tactical displays. The pack stopped advancing. The massive Ketharan predators that had been moving steadily toward the colony's perimeter suddenly froze. And then, as everyone watched, they began to retreat. The juvenile had reached them. The pack had found its young. And now they were leaving. On the screens, Haewon could see the juvenile at the center of the adult predators. The creatures were touching it gently with their noses and heads, making sounds that resembled that strange, rumbling purr she had come to recognize as contentment or affection. The pack was celebrating the return of their young, and then they melted into the forest and were gone. Teo stared at the blank tactical display, confusion evident on his face. He looked at Haewon, then at Min-seok, then back at the screens. "Did you just stop an attack by releasing the one thing we were defending against?" he asked slowly. "The juvenile was not a threat," Haewon said, her voice steady despite her fear. "It was a member of that pack. They were not attacking us. They were searching for their lost young. I showed them that we understood this. I showed them that we were willing to help, rather than hurt. Teo was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely calm. "You violated direct orders. You broke containment protocol. You released a dangerous creature into our facility. You could have gotten people killed." He paused. "But you also prevented what might have turned into a serious conflict. You made contact with an alien species. You proved that communication is possible." He looked at his security officers. "Lock them both in a holding cell. We need to send a full report to Earth. The Colonial Council is going to want to understand what just happened here." As they were being led away, Haewon felt no regret. She had done what she believed was right. She had proven that understanding could bridge the gap between species. She had shown that violence was not always the answer. And somewhere out in the forest, a young creature was being reunited with its family, alive and safe because one human had believed that communication was possible. Whatever happened to her now, that was worth it. The holding cell was small and cold. There were no windows. The walls were gray metal, and the single light in the ceiling cast everything in a harsh white glow. HFY had been there for 3 days when Min-seok was placed in the cell beside hers. They could not see each other through the sealed door, but they could hear each other's voices if they spoke clearly. Earth received the report, Min-seok said through the communication panel that connected their cells. I managed to see some of the messages before they locked me away. They are not as angry as I thought they would be. There is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of debate. But there is also interest. A lot of interest. What do you mean, interest? HFY asked hopefully. I mean the scientists on Earth are excited, Min-seok replied. A predator species that is intelligent enough to form complex family structures. A species that is capable of learning and choosing trust over aggression. This is possibly the most important discovery humanity has ever made about intelligent life. He paused. The politicians and military officers, though, they are less pleased. There are discussions about whether we should continue to inhabit the planet, whether we should try to study the creatures more, whether the creatures might eventually become a threat to the colony. On the 4th day, HFY was released from the holding cell, but she was not free to return to her normal duties. Instead, she was placed under what could only be described as supervised arrest. She was allowed to move around the colony, but always with security officers nearby. She was allowed to work in the laboratory, but her research was monitored carefully. What surprised her most was that Min-seok was also released, and they were allowed to work together. It seemed that the Colonial Council had decided to let them continue their research into Ketharan behavior, whether this was because they believed in the work or because they wanted to observe 2 people who had acted against protocol. HFY could not say. 2 weeks after the release of the juvenile, something remarkable happened. A Ketharan predator appeared at the colony's perimeter. It was large and powerful, clearly an adult. But it did not attack. It did not breach the barriers. Instead, it stood there, looking at the facility, making sounds that carried across the distance. Commander Teo wanted to shoot it. His security team was preparing weapons. But HFY convinced him to wait. She armed herself with nothing but a communication device and a simple food supplement, and she walked out to meet the creature. The adult Ketharan watched her approach without moving. Its golden eyes tracked every step she took. When HFY was close enough, she could see the detail of the massive predator. She could see scars on its body, evidence of battles and hunts. She could see the intelligence in those eyes. And somehow, she was not afraid. I released your young one, HFY said, knowing the creature could not understand her words, but believing it might understand her intention. I wanted to help. I wanted to show that we are not your enemies. The creature made a sound. It was different from the juvenile's purr. It was deeper and more powerful. But it did not sound aggressive. It sounded almost like acknowledgement. The predator turned and walked away, back toward the forest. But before it disappeared, it looked back at HFY. In that look was something that seemed like recognition, something that seemed like gratitude. That night, HFY wrote in her personal log, I believe that today, a bridge was built between our species. Not through weapons or defense, but through simple kindness and understanding. The creatures of Kethera Prime are not mindless predators. They are intelligent beings, capable of complex emotions and behaviors. They are capable of bonding, of protecting their young, of choosing peace over violence. If humanity learns nothing else from our time on this planet, we must learn this, that understanding is always more powerful than fear. Over the following months, the relationship between the colony and the Ketheran creatures slowly began to change. There were no more aggressive encounters. Instead, there were quiet observations. The creatures would sometimes appear at the colony's perimeter, watching, seeming to assess whether the humans were truly harmless. HFY continued her research. She documented everything she learned about the creatures. She created detailed records of their social structures, their communication methods, their hunting patterns, their family bonds. Every piece of information challenged everything that had been previously believed about Ketharan predators. And slowly, the attitudes of the colonists began to shift. People who had seen predators as nothing but threats began to understand them as complex beings. The Colony Council voted to reduce weapons and expand peaceful observation protocols. The security teams were trained in non-violent contact procedures. New facilities were built for research rather than containment. 9 months after the release of the juvenile, HFY was called to a formal hearing. The Colonial Council had reviewed her actions in detail, considering whether they constituted crimes against protocol or acts of heroism. In the end, they made an official decision. The charges against her were dropped. More than that, her research was officially sanctioned. She was promoted to the position of Chief Xenocontact Officer, a new position created specifically for her. She was given resources and personnel to continue her work of understanding and documenting the Ketharan species. Commander Teo was the one to deliver the official news. When he found HFY in the laboratory, there was the hint of a smile on his face. "It seems," he said, "that breaking protocol for the right reasons is not always treated as a crime. The Council has decided that your approach to xenocontact shows promise. You will continue your work, but now with full support of the Colonial Administration." "What about Minsok?" HFY asked. "Dr. Minsok has also been cleared," Teo replied. "He has been appointed as your deputy. It seems the two of you are going to change how humanity approaches contact with alien species." That evening, HFY stood alone at the observation window of the facility, looking out at Cathara Prime's twin moons rising in the darkening sky. She thought about the juvenile predator, now grown and reunited with its family. She thought about the adult that had come to the perimeter, perhaps to confirm that the human who had helped its young was truly not a threat. And she thought about what had changed. Not in the creatures of Cathara Prime, but in herself and in the colony. They had learned that fear could be overcome, that understanding could bridge any gap, that kindness, when offered genuinely, could be recognized and reciprocated across species boundaries. The journey was far from over. There was so much more to learn about the Ketharan creatures and their world. But now the journey would be one of cooperation and discovery rather than conflict and fear. And that, HFY believed, was how it should have been from the beginning.